Hi, I'm Doc Bayne, and I want to share some experiences I've had. I was a park ranger at Sterling Forest, and then I became the acting environmental educator, and then eventually they made me the president of the Friends of Sterling Forest. I have known about the Great Change since my childhood, and luckily I was able to get a job at Sterling Forest State Park where the Great Chain was made. I would like to share the experience and share what I have found about the Great Chain. It's 1736, iron was discovered at Sterling Forest, and it was in veins in the ground. If you took a closer look at it, you would see that the ore is crystals. And if you were to go up to a piece of the ore sticking out of the ground and start hitting it with a hammer, a pick, a drill, it would break. It was very brittle. It was 70% magnetite, which is iron ore, and 30% other minerals. They would start chopping away at it and follow that vein down into the ground. They would take it out, put it into wagons, and then they would sell it to blacksmiths. Blacksmith would take the ore, put it into his charcoal-based fire, have an assistant with bellows to bring it up to about 1800 degrees, and then he would hit it with a hammer. Now, unfortunately, 30% of it was other minerals. It's a job that must have been very tough. In 1738, they built a bloomery. A bloomery is where you take the ore, you would have a stream and bellows to heat the ore, and then they would have anvils. So you would take a piece of ore, heat it up, take it with these giant pair of pliers from the fire, and you would have what was called a bloom. About 20%, maybe 25% of the other minerals were bubbled out of it. You would then take the bloom and you would have workmen hit it with hammers. And when they were done, the blacksmith would have a piece of iron to work with. Sure, there were some sparks that would come out of it, that's called scoria, but not like it was when it was 30%. Well, a new industry had to start. The bloomery needed lots of charcoal. So this is a charcoal pit. They would stack the wood up, make a chimney on the inside, and then cover it with sod, then shovel dirt on top of it and light it. And that would burn about 2 weeks. When they did that, they would have colliers. These gentlemen were colliers. Each man had a 12-hour shift. And if you've ever walked in Bear Mountain or Sterling Forest or Harriman, if you've ever seen a half circle of stone, that would have been a collier's house. But look at the forest behind them. They pretty much cleared all of the wood. After the fire was out, they would rake the top off, called raking off the head, basically rake all the dirt off. Then you would have just charcoal. Charcoal would have been put in baskets. The baskets would have been on mule, horses, man, wagon, whatever way they had to carry it. And the charcoal would be taken to a bloomery. And if you look down the bottom here on the left, you see charcoal in baskets. We're really not sure about this guy. But at that point is where they were making iron. In 1750, the Iron Act came about. England petitioned the colonies to make pig iron. What was going on was England had lots of iron, iron ore, but no charcoal. They had no wood. They had cut down all the forests. So when they heard that they found iron ore in the colonies, they said, let's get the colonies to make pig iron for us. They went and got people to show the colonies how to make blast furnaces. Here's a blast furnace. It was loaded from the top, You would put all the charcoal, magnetite, and limestone as a fluxing agent. Inside, you would have a sluice running water, and the water wheel would turn a shaft and run bellows. The bellows would blow air in and bring the temperature up to about 2,000 degrees. Now, if you notice on the right, this guy, there were two ports. They opened the top one, and that 30% of other minerals was lighter than the iron. So it would float on top and they would drain that out. That was called slag. That was garbage. Once iron came out of that port, they would close it off and open up the second one and make this line called the sow. And off the sow, they would make slits. And that was called pig iron. Each of the pigs had to be the same size so that they would fit in the hulls of the British ships, because all the iron was to go to Britain. First blast furnace that was made in Sterling Forest was in 1751. There's a Sterling Lake up on the top. Well, new rules now came down from England. Nothing is to be made from the iron in the colonies. All the iron is to go to England. In Belleville, Warwick, there was a forge built in 1745. Well, the British came and shut it down because nothing is to be made in the colonies. All the pig iron is to go to England. They will make products and sell it back to us. While I was doing education, I knew about the Iron Act, and somebody said to me, hey, Doc, Sterling had a forge in the Hidden Valley. Where was it? I went, there's no forge here because it was against the law. So I started some more research. I figured if there was a forge there, because I talked to other historians and said, yeah, Sterling had a forge. So here is Sterling Lake, Greenwood Lake. I took my compass and I went to the foot of Sterling Lake. And then on my days off, I walked every 5 degrees of the compass. I would go from 0 to north to south, follow each line. It took me about a year. Did not find the forge. Started doing research, went to Washington, went to New York Historical Society, and I found this map. And here at the bottom of Sterling Lake was where the furnace was. Now this map was drawn by Robert Erskine in 1777. Examining the map, down here it says forge. Aha. From my journey, I know that spot. So I went down to that spot, and here's what I found. There was a log here, a log here, a log here, and another log here in this rock pile. Aha. I found a cribbing dam. At that time period, to make a dam, they would make a triangle on each side of the water, fill it with rocks, angle boards, put rocks behind it, and that would become a cribbing dam. Here's the site. There's the triangle, the cribbing dam. I walked around, looked in the brook, and I found this thing. I talked to the park manager, and eventually they let me dig it up to see what it was, and this is what I found. I found a gudgeon. I found the Sterling Forge, and that was in 2008. Now, many people don't know what a gudgeon is, so I'll show you. Here is a shaft. You cut an X into it, put this piece of metal called the gudgeon into it, and it could be used to spin a water wheel. There's the gudgeon. The gudgeon now sits at the visitor center in Sterling Forest. If you ever get a chance to go to the visitor center, look outside the gift shop and you'll see the gudgeon sitting there. Very cool. Had to do a little more research. I had to learn a lot more about forges. So I found that Roland Robbins, who was an archaeologist, was hired by City Investing to work at the furnace. The front of the furnace had collapsed, and City Investing wanted to build 13,000 houses in Sterling Forest. So they felt if they had a great historic monument, people would be attracted there. Went up to Saugus, Massachusetts. Saugus Ironworks was one of the first ironworks in the colonies, and Roland Robbins did the archaeological dig there. So we went up there, and here is the Saugus furnace. And next to the furnace was a forge, because at the time period, 1650 and 1647, he could have a forge. Roland Robbins reconstructed these sites. Pig iron was made at the furnace and taken to a forge. Here is a forge fire where they would heat the pig up, bring it over to a trip hammer, which was in the forge, and shape it into things. Depending on what they were making, they would shape it like this. But they needed this big square so that the pliers would hold it, then eventually they could make long rods. So this is the actual trip hammer at Saugus, which is very similar to what they had at the Sterling Forest Forge. He's opening up the sluice to let the water in. Now he closes the sluice. So this trip hammer would come down and hit the pig, and you would shape it to make products. Look at the base of this. Here is an anvil on this big tree log. This is what I found at Sterling. There is the base of the trip hammer. And in the water is the trip hammer arm. The trip hammer arm would have been held with a gudgeon. Now, help is needed in 1778. Let's get a little history going on. So I found the forge where the great chain that was put across the river at West Point when the Revolution was made. 1778, here is our flag. And George Washington determined that a chain was needed to stop the British from attacking the New England colonies. General Hathorn was the general or leader who determined where the chain should go, and he decided that West Point was the best place for it. See, England wanted to attack the New England colonies. If they could have done that, the war would have been over. So the British were going to come down from Canada, the Great Lakes, come in from the Atlantic Ocean, then ships would have to come in to supply all of these troops. So if the ships came into the Hudson, they could bring supplies for all of these troops coming in. But if we put a chain there, that would prevent the ships from coming in, and that would stop the British from attacking the New England colonies. George asked Peter Townsend if he would make a great chain to be put across the river, because Sterling had the strongest iron in North America. And here's an actual copy of the agreement, and here's Peter Townsend's signature, to make the great chain. The day that they signed the agreement, Sterling Forge worked around the clock from February to April to make the great chain. They would make 10 link sections, put them into oxen wagon, and take them up to Brewster at the Brewster Forge. But after the first shipment, it snowed 4 feet. So they had to do it by sledge. And here you can see 10 link sections being taken up Here's Sterling Lake, and this is the route up to the Brewster Forge in New Windsor, where the chain, as each 10 link sections were brought together, they would hook them. So the last link would have been left open. They would heat that and forge that link shut around the next 10 links. Here is the river, the Munda River, used to be called the Murderers River, different story. And that's where the forge was. And after the chain was assembled, it'd be put onto logs, floated down the Hudson River to West Point. Here's West Point today. It was the perfect place to put a chain. At that section, it was 202 feet deep. So the chain was put onto logs, anchored to the shore of Constitution Island and West Point. Then they started building redoubts, forts. They actually built 15 forts. Because if a ship was to come down, it would have to do this at ebb tide to make those turns. A ship under full sail could not make those turns. The British ship, that is. Here's the firepower. You would not want to stop your ship at that point. The British never attempted it. Here is one of the forts, Fort Putnam, one of the 15 forts. Now, during my study, I was told that Ringwood Manor made the chain. Well, no, I'm sorry. Ringwood Manor did not make the Great Chain. The Great Chain was made of Sterling Forest. But Ringwood Manor made a boom chain, which was put in front of the Great Chain. The idea was if a ship was to come down, it would have to slow up before it hit the big chain. If you go to Washington's headquarters in New Windsor or Newburgh, you will see the Great Boom Chain. Up at West Point, they saved 13 links of the chain. They also saved a clevis. This is a clevis. If you take this pin out, you could pull this rod out and open the chain so that the friendly troops could get through. They also made swivels. This is a swivel. Now, they had a chain at Fort Montgomery, a much smaller chain, which broke 2 times from tidal action. So Captain Macham, the designer of the chain, decided to put swivels in the West Point chain. So through tidal action, if the chain and log should turn, it would turn on this swivel. Here's an actual swivel. The end has been broken off, and this sits at the Boscobel House. Now, it's just amazing what happened. The amount of work that went into making this chain, and the amount of work to get it there, and the engineering feat was just incredible. The great part about the chain is it stopped the British from attacking the New England colonies, and it actually cut the Revolutionary War in half. And if it wasn't for that chain, we'd be speaking English. Thanks for listening. I've been asked a few times how I learned about the chain, and I actually learned about the chain at 5 years old. My mother was into history, and she took me to West Point, and that is me standing on the Great Chain.